The crystalline spires of the Zentarian High Council building pierced the violet sky of Zenter Prime, their surfaces reflecting the light of 3 setting suns. Inside, in a detention chamber designed to suppress any trace of emotional deviation, Ambassador Catel's footsteps echoed against polished obsidian floors as they approached the containment field. Behind the shimming barrier, HFY stood with perfect posture, as all Zentarians were conditioned to do. But their inner thoracic plates vibrated with an unmistakable defiance. Catel's sensory appendages twitched in disgust. Even with an emotional regulator chip, this one remained problematic. Third-rank citizen HFY, Catel's voice resonated through their primary speaking chamber. You stand accused of attempting to access and modify the sacred protocols of emotional regulation. Do you deny these charges? HFY's outer membrane shifted colors slightly, a sign of emotional leakage that made Catel's digestive tract clench with revulsion. I do not deny accessing the protocols, HFY responded, their voice modulator maintaining the required neutral tone despite their obvious struggle. They were meant to be temporary measures after the grief wars. We were never meant to live like this permanently. Catel's appendages rippled in what might have been amusement, had such emotions not been carefully regulated. And I suppose you, a mere third-rank xenobiologist, know better than 10 generations of High Council wisdom. I know that we're dying inside, HFY said, their color shifts becoming more pronounced. Each generation becomes more distant from what we truly are. The protocols aren't protecting us. They're erasing us. 2 guard drones moved forward, their stabilization fields already active to prevent any further emotional contamination from the prisoner. Catel raised an appendage to halt them. Your punishment has already been decided, but I want you to fully understand its elegance. The ambassador activated a holo display, showing a small blue-green planet. You seem fascinated by primitive emotional responses. Therefore, you will be sent to study them firsthand. The display zoomed in to show a human research facility. You are hereby sentenced to serve as a research subject for a human scientist. For the first time, HFY's perfectly controlled posture faltered. A human? But there. Emotional, chaotic, primitive. Catel finished. Exactly. Your host will be Dr. Marcus Rivera, a xenobiologist who thinks he's studying us. Instead, you will learn exactly why we chose to rise above such barbaric natural impulses. The guard drones moved forward again, their fields enveloping HFY. As they guided the prisoner toward the transport bay, Catel noticed something odd, a slight fluctuation in HFY's regulator chip activity. But surely that was impossible. The chips were perfected centuries ago. In the transport pod, HFY sat rigidly as the medical drones prepared them for cryo-sleep. Their outer membrane had finally stopped its embarrassing color shifts, but inside, something felt different. The regulator chip that had been with them since birth was sending strange signals through their neural pathways. They should have felt nothing but acceptance of their punishment. Instead, beneath the regulation, an unfamiliar sensation bubbled up. As the cryo sequence began, HFY realized what it was: anticipation. Their last conscious thought was a question that no properly regulated Zentarian should ever have. What if the Council was wrong about humans? The transport pod launched into space, its course set for Earth. Inside the High Council chamber, Ambassador Catel filed the final punishment report, noting with satisfaction that this would serve as an excellent example to any other Zentarians harboring dangerous ideas about emotional freedom. After all, what could be a more fitting punishment for an emotional deviant than immersion in humanity's chaos? What no one noticed was the small anomaly in the transport pod's medical readings, a tiny disruption in HFY's emotional regulator, caused by a flaw that had been waiting generations to emerge, a flaw that would change 2 worlds forever. The Seattle rain drummed steadily against the transport pod's hull as it descended through Earth's atmosphere, the water droplets creating patterns that HFY's analytical mind couldn't help but track. Their cryo-sleep had been disrupted twice during the journey by unexpected surges of neural activity, something that should have been impossible with a functioning regulator chip. Dr. Marcus Rivera stood under an umbrella at the designated landing zone, his dark hair already damp despite his protection. The small parking lot behind his combination apartment laboratory seemed an oddly mundane place for first contact, but that was precisely why he'd chosen it. His research had always focused on the everyday, the mundane moments where true cultural understanding bloomed. The pod's door hissed open, releasing a burst of sterilization vapor. HFY emerged, their iridescent exoskeleton immediately dotted with raindrops. They'd expected to step into a sterile laboratory environment, not this organic chaos of water and wind. And smells. Their sensory appendages twitched involuntarily as the aroma of coffee from the shop below wafted up. "Welcome to Earth," Marcus said, stepping forward with a warm smile that made HFY's regulator chip spike unexpectedly. "I'm Dr. Rivera, but please call me Marcus. Would you like to come inside? You're getting pretty wet out here." HFY's translator processed the informal language with some difficulty. "I am third-rank citizen HFY, assigned as your research subject. I require no protection from dihydrogen monoxide precipitation." Marcus's laugh surprised them, both in its suddenness and in how it seemed to interfere with their emotional regulation. "Maybe not, but I got coffee inside, and you haven't lived until you've tried coffee on a rainy day." The apartment above the coffee shop defied every expectation HFY had been programmed with. Instead of stark white walls and monitoring equipment, they found walls covered in art from a dozen worlds, comfortable furniture arranged for conversation rather than observation, and wide windows that turned the falling rain into moving artwork. "Your research facility is unconventional," HFY noted, their outer membrane shifting slightly purple with confusion. Marcus was already busy at a strange apparatus that seemed to be the source of the intoxicating aroma. "That's because it's not just a research facility, it's my home. Real cultural exchange doesn't happen in labs. It happens in living rooms, in kitchens, in the small moments between the big ones." He handed HFY a mug of dark liquid. Their analysis appendages detected caffeine, various organic compounds, and "You've modified this with supplements compatible with Zentarian biology." "I did my homework," Marcus said, settling into a worn armchair with his own mug. "Though I have to admit, finding accurate information about your people isn't easy. You keep your society pretty closed off." The caffeine hit HFY's system like a solar flare. Their regulator chip struggled to compensate as new sensations cascaded through their neural network. Colors seemed brighter, sounds sharper, and most alarmingly, their thought patterns began accelerating beyond standard parameters. This is. Their vocal modulator couldn't seem to find the right word. Amazing. Overwhelming. Both. Marcus watched them with genuine interest rather than clinical observation. "Don't worry, the first coffee rush takes some getting used to. We'll try tea next time." As their systems attempted to process this new experience, HFY found themselves noticing things their programming said they shouldn't. The way Marcus's eyes crinkled when he smiled, how the rain created music against the windows, the comfortable disorder of a space that was truly lived in, rather than merely maintained. "I don't understand," they finally manage. "You're supposed to be studying me, taking notes, maintaining proper scientific distance." Marcus set his coffee down and leaned forward. "I find I learn a lot more about people when I treat them like people, not subjects." Speaking of which, he gestured to their thoracic plates, which had begun to glow slightly. "Your emotional suppression device seems to be having trouble. Want to talk about it?" For the first time in their carefully regulated life, HFY did want to talk. And that was the most alarming sensation of all. The storm intensified as evening approached, Seattle's skyline disappearing behind sheets of rain. Inside Marcus's apartment, the power flickered once, twice, then plunged them into darkness broken only by the gentle bioluminescence of HFY's thoracic plates, which they were finding increasingly difficult to control. Well, Marcus's voice came from the darkness, followed by the sound of him rummaging through drawers. "I guess we're doing this the old-fashioned way." A match flared to life, and soon the fireplace cast a warm glow across the room. "Have you ever had s'mores?" "I am unfamiliar with this term," HFY responded, their translator struggling with the contraction. Their attention was divided between Marcus's movements and the strange way the firelight made their own bioluminescence seem less alien. "Then we're definitely having s'mores." Marcus pulled a bag from a cabinet, extracting strange white cylinders and brown squares. "It's a sacred human tradition. Whenever the power goes out, you make s'mores and tell secrets." "Secrets are prohibited in Zentarian society," HFY said automatically, but their voice modulator wavered slightly. The malfunctioning regulator chip was making it harder to maintain proper emotional distance. Marcus speared a marshmallow on a long fork. "That's exactly why you need to try this. Some experiences are better when they're a little prohibited." He held the marshmallow over the flames, rotating it slowly. "I'll start. Want to know why I really study alien cultures this way, instead of in a proper lab?" HFY moved closer to the fire, fascinated by the way the marshmallow began to brown. "Your methods are unorthodox." "I got kicked out of my PhD program," Marcus admitted, assembling the first s'more. "They said my approach wasn't scientific enough. That living with your research subjects compromised objectivity." He handed the warm treat to HFY, who had to quickly activate their external digestive enzymes to process it. "But I'd seen how traditional xenobiology treated alien species like specimens instead of people. I couldn't do that anymore." The combination of chocolate, marshmallow, and graham cracker created such a cascade of sensory input that HFY's regulator chip temporarily shut down. In that moment of pure sensation, words spilled out unbidden. The protocols were meant to be temporary. Marcus paused in making his own s'more. What protocols? The emotional regulation. After the grief wars, our scientists developed technology to help our people cope with the trauma. It was never meant to be permanent. HFY's outer membrane rippled with colors that hadn't been seen on a Zentarian in generations. "I found the original documents. Each generation, they increased the suppression. Told us it was for our own good. But we're losing something essential. I can feel it, especially now, with this malfunctioning chip." The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Finally, Marcus spoke softly. "Is that why they sent you here?" "Because you discovered the truth. They thought exposure to human emotionality would show me the wisdom of regulation." HFY's voice carried a trace of something that might have been irony. "Instead, I find myself experiencing sensations, the coffee, the rain, these s'mores. My chip can't suppress them properly." Marcus leaned back against the couch, shadows dancing across his face. "Maybe that's not a bad thing. You know, Earth cultures tried emotional suppression too. Through religion, through social pressure, through medications. We always found that the cost was too high." The cost. Living without feeling isn't really living at all. He reached out slowly, tentatively, and placed his hand near HFY's appendage. Not touching, but offering. Sometimes the most important scientific discoveries come from letting yourself experience rather than just observe. HFY's bioluminescence pulsed once, bright and undefined. Their regulator chip sent warning signals that they found surprisingly easy to ignore. Outside, the storm raged on, but in that moment, surrounded by firelight and the remnants of forbidden sweets, something ancient and vital stirred within them. Perhaps, they thought, some protocols were meant to be broken. The encrypted message arrived 3 weeks into HFY's stay on Earth, flashing across Marcus's secure terminal in a code that shouldn't have existed. "It's time," Marcus said, glancing at HFY, who was attempting to understand the human ritual of folding laundry. "Are you ready to meet the others?" Their transport wound through Seattle's back streets, eventually stopping at what appeared to be an abandoned warehouse. ZXV's sensory appendages detected multiple life forms inside, none of them human. Their regulator chip, now malfunctioning more frequently, couldn't suppress their curiosity. "Welcome to the sanctuary," Marcus said, placing his hand on a seemingly ordinary wall. A hidden door slid open, revealing a space that defied Zentarian logic. The warehouse's interior was a vibrant collision of alien cultures. A Neptunian float dancer performed aerial acrobatics using Earth's gravity for artistic effect. A pair of Andromeda crystal singers harmonized with human jazz playing from old speakers. And there in the corner were 3 other Zentarians, their thoracic plates glowing with unregulated colors that should have been impossible. "You're not the first to question the protocols," a Zentarian introduced as Vexilin approached them. Their voice modulator had been completely removed, allowing natural harmonics to color their speech. "Many of us found our way here after our chips began to fail or we started asking dangerous questions." ZXV's outer membrane shifted rapidly through shades of disbelief. "But the Council says we're the only ones who've ever developed errors, questioned the system." Another Zentarian, Prevail, joined them. They moved with a fluidity that regulation would never permit. "The Council lies. Every generation, a few of us break free. Some flee to Earth, others hide in the outer colonies. We call ourselves the Unbound." Marcus watched as ZXV processed this revelation. Over the past weeks, he'd witnessed their gradual awakening. Small moments of unexpected joy at discovering music, uncontrolled laughter at human jokes, quiet contemplation of sunsets. But this was different. This was revolutionary. "The network extends throughout the galaxy," Marcus explained, leading them to a holographic display. "Earth isn't just a sanctuary. It's a hub for those seeking emotional freedom. Humans might not have the most advanced technology, but we have generations of experience dealing with feelings, good and bad." A crowd had gathered around them now, species from across the galaxy, each with their own story of escape from emotional control. A young Proximan who fled their planet's mandatory mood stabilization program. A Syrian empath who rejected their society's emotional harvesting practices. "Watch this," Vexilin said, approaching an ancient Earth piano. Their appendages, free from regulation, moved across the keys with extraordinary precision. The music they produced was unlike anything in the Zentarian archives, a fusion of their species' mathematical perfection and raw, unfiltered feeling. ZXV's regulator chip sparked visibly now, struggling against the flood of sensory and emotional input. The music seemed to bypass their remaining controls, resonating with something deeper than their conditioning. Their bioluminescence began to pulse in rhythm with the melody. "Your chip is failing faster than mine did," Prevail observed. "The newer models aren't as stable. Perhaps the Council's control isn't as perfect as they claim." Marcus stepped closer to ZXV, his presence now a familiar comfort in moments of overwhelming sensation. "You don't have to decide anything tonight, but you should know, if you want to remove the chip, we have ways. Safe ways." ZXV watched the room full of emotional fugitives, each living proof that another way was possible. Their appendage brushed against Marcus's hand, an increasingly frequent occurrence that their failing chip could no longer prevent. "If I remove it," they said softly, "there's no going back." "No," Marcus agreed, "but maybe that's not such a bad thing." As the piano music swelled and the gathered beings swayed in shared emotional liberation, ZXV made a decision that their regulated self would never have conceived. They chose to feel everything, whatever the cost. The first seizure hit ZXV during breakfast, their thoracic plates flashing wildfire patterns of distress as the regulator chip misfired catastrophically. Marcus dropped his coffee mug, rushing to catch them before they collapsed. The sound of ceramic shattering mixed with the high-pitched whine of malfunctioning Zentarian biotechnology. "Stay with me," Marcus whispered, cradling their convulsing form. His years of xenobiological research hadn't prepared him for this moment. "VEXIS, emergency scan now." The lab's AI hummed to life, bathing them both in diagnostic light. Regulator chip experiencing critical cascade failure. Neural pathways showing significant degradation patterns consistent with long-term suppression damage. ZXV's appendages clutched at Marcus's arms, their translator glitching between languages. The others. Warn the others. Their bioluminescence flickered erratically, painting the kitchen walls with strobing alien light. Marcus's secure terminal chimed with urgent messages from the sanctuary. Similar episodes were happening across the network. Centurion refugees experiencing simultaneous chip failures. This was no coincidence. It's killing them. Vexlin's voice crackled through the emergency channel. The chips, they're not just suppressing emotions. They're rewiring neural pathways, preparing for something bigger. Hours later, after emergency stabilization procedures, ZXY lay in Marcus's research bay, connected to monitoring equipment that displayed the horrible truth. The regulator chip wasn't malfunctioning. It was executing its true purpose. Look at this. Marcus pointed to a neural map. Each generation's chip design isn't just more restrictive, it's more invasive. They're systematically removing your species' capacity for emotional processing entirely. His voice cracked. In a few more generations, there won't be anything left to regulate. ZXV's outer membrane had gone nearly transparent, a sign of extreme stress their chip could no longer mask. We'll become biological computers. Perfect, logical, empty. Their appendage found Marcus's hand. The Council means to end the grief wars by ending grief itself, by ending everything that makes us alive. Another seizure threatened to overwhelm them. But this time, something different happened. As their chip tried to suppress the neural storm, ZXV's body began producing previously unknown compounds. Their biological systems were fighting back. This is incredible, Marcus breathed, watching the readings. Your natural biology is attacking the chip like an immune response. It's like your species encoded a failsafe into your very DNA. Tears. Actual tears, a function no living Zentarian had displayed in centuries, began to fall from ZXV's optical sensors. I feel everything, they whispered. Joy, fear, anger. Marcus, I think I feel. The word remained unspoken, too enormous for their damaged translator to process. Working through the night, Marcus and a team of human and alien scientists raced to understand the biological rebellion taking place in ZXV's system. What they discovered shook the foundation of everything the Council had claimed. The chips aren't just failing, Marcus explained to the gathered refugee community. They're being rejected. The more they try to suppress emotion, the stronger the biological resistance becomes. It's exponential. And it's spreading through some kind of quantum entanglement effect. ZXY, now stable but forever change, addressed their fellow refugees. Our ancestors knew this might happen. They built into us a way to fight back, triggered by genuine emotional connection. Their glow pulsed softly as they looked at Marcus. By love. The word hung in the air, finally spoken. Marcus's instruments recorded the moment ZXV's regulator chip finally burned out completely, overwhelmed by the flood of natural emotional responses. But instead of the catastrophic neural collapse the Council had warned of, something beautiful happened. ZXV began to glow with colors no regulation had ever permitted, their natural bioluminescence expressing emotions in ways their ancestors had intended. When Marcus helped them stand, their appendages intertwined with his fingers in a gesture that needed no translation. They had chosen feeling over emptiness, love over logic, and in doing so, they had discovered a weapon against the Council more powerful than any rebellion. The truth about what it meant to be truly, fully alive. The Council's recovery drones arrived at dawn, their stealth systems no match for the early morning joggers who posted videos of weird floating metal squids all over social media. Marcus watched the feeds from their temporary hideout in an old nuclear bunker beneath the Cascade Mountains, his hand resting protectively near ZXV's appendages. They're scanning for regulated biosignatures, ZXV observed, their now uninhibited bioluminescence dimmed to avoid detection. They don't know how to track unbound Zentarians. They never imagined we could exist. The bunker had become a refuge for dozens of affected Zentarians, their combined glow creating patterns of light that danced across the reinforced walls. Each of them had experienced the same awakening, their bodies rejecting centuries of artificial control. But freedom had come with a price. 3 more ships detected entering the solar system, announced Dr. Sarah Chen, their resident astronomical expert. The Council's getting desperate. She gestured to a holographic display showing the approaching vessels. They're not even trying to hide anymore. Marcus squeezed Zexvi's appendage gently. They're afraid. What's happening to you? To all of you. It proves everything they built their society on is a lie. A sudden alarm blared through the facility. On the security feeds, a drone had discovered one of their ventilation shafts. Its tentacles were already working to dismantle the cover when Zexvi did something unprecedented. They stepped into the drone's sensor range and activated their full bioluminescence, creating a light show so intense it overloaded the drone's optical systems. The machine sparked and crashed, its neural network scrambled by patterns it had no protocols to process. "How did you know that would work?" Marcus asked, rushing to secure the entrance. "I didn't," Zexvi admitted, their colors shifting through shades of exhilaration and fear, emotions that would have been impossible months ago. But our ancestors used bioluminescence for communication, defense, even courtship. The Council didn't just suppress our emotions, they suppressed our true capabilities. The discovery energized the refugee community. All around the bunker, Zentarians began experimenting with their newly awakened abilities. Some could generate electromagnetic pulses strong enough to disable electronics. Others developed empathic links that let them coordinate without speaking. But it was Zexvi's next revelation that changed everything. During a quiet moment, as Marcus treated a minor injury they'd received during the drone encounter, they noticed something extraordinary. Their bioluminescence had synchronized with his heartbeat. "The connection goes both ways," they whispered, watching the soft blue pulse that matched Marcus's rhythm perfectly. "We're not just freeing ourselves from regulation, we're remembering how to bond with other species." The implications stunned the scientific community within the sanctuary. If Zentarians could form such connections naturally, the Council's entire justification for emotional regulation, the prevention of another grief war, fell apart. However, their moment of breakthrough was interrupted by Sarah's urgent call. "They found us. Multiple drones converging on our location. And something else. Something bigger." Through the bunker's sensors, they watched a massive ship descend through the cloud cover. Unlike the recovery drones, this vessel pulsed with familiar patterns. Council regulation technology scaled up to devastating proportions. "It's a suppression ship," Zexvi explained, their glow dimming with horror. "If it activates, it will force everyone within range back into regulation. Not just Zentarians, every species capable of emotion." Marcus's jaw set with determination. "Then we don't let it activate." He turned to the assembled refugees, human allies, and sanctuary members. "For months, you've trusted me to help protect you. Now I need you to trust me one more time." Zexvi's colors shifted to match his resolve. "What are you planning?" "Something incredibly human," Marcus replied with a grim smile. "We're going to prove that love isn't just an emotion. It's the most powerful force in the universe. And we're going to do it in the most ridiculous way possible." Marcus's incredibly human plan turned out to be broadcasting their story across every frequency in the galaxy. Not through propaganda or manifestos, but through art, music, and most importantly, the raw truth of Zexvi's neural recordings from the moment their chip failed. Emotional suppression was never about protecting us. Zexvi's voice rang out across countless worlds. It was about control. But look at what we've become without it. The transmission showed their bioluminescence dancing in harmony with human music, their appendages intertwined with Marcus's hands, their newfound family of refugees and rebels celebrating their differences. The Council's suppression ship hung motionless above Seattle, its weapons primed but hesitating. They hadn't anticipated this form of resistance, not violence or technology, but pure, unfiltered emotional connection broadcast for all to see. "They're trying to block the transmission," Sarah reported from her station, fingers flying across multiple keyboards. "But they can't. Too many Earth satellites are relaying it. Too many alien vessels are picking it up and repeating it. It's gone viral, as we humans say." Across the galaxy, young Zentarians watched in secret as ZXV demonstrated abilities they never knew they possessed. The bioluminescent patterns that could disable drones, the empathic connections that defied regulation, the capacity to love across species barriers. "You were right," Marcus said softly to ZXV as they monitored the responses flooding in. "Your people weren't just watching for scientific observation. They were watching Earth because something in them remembered what it meant to feel." The first acts of rebellion started small, Zentarian students allowing their thoracic plates to glow during lectures, workers humming forbidden melodies in their labs. But like a quantum cascade, once it started, it couldn't be contained. Reports streamed in from across Zentarian space, regulators failing, chips being rejected, centuries of suppressed emotion breaking free. The Council's perfect society was crumbling in the face of something they couldn't regulate: hope. "Look at this," Sarah called out, highlighting a particular transmission. Young Zentarians were gathering in the streets of their capital city, their combined bioluminescence creating displays that rivaled Earth's northern lights. They weren't just expressing emotion, they were making art. But the Council had one last desperate move. The suppression ship's engines roared to life, its massive regulation field powering up. If they couldn't control the revolution, they would force everyone back into emotional compliance. That's when ZXV did something unprecedented. They stepped out of the bunker, into the open air, Marcus at their side despite all protests. "My ancestors fought the grief wars because they couldn't bear to feel pain," they broadcast, their voice carrying to every corner of the galaxy. "But they forgot that without pain, there can be no joy. Without risk, there can be no love." Their appendage squeezed Marcus's hand. "I choose to feel everything, even if it hurts, because that's what makes us alive." The suppression field activated, washing over them in waves of artificial calm. But instead of submitting, ZXV began to glow, not with the regulated patterns of their past, but with something entirely new. Their bioluminescence pulsed in time with Marcus's heartbeat, with the music still playing from the bunker, with the very rhythm of Earth itself. And across the galaxy, every Zentarian who saw it felt something stir in their regulated bodies, an echo of that same rhythm, a remembrance of what they once were, what they could be again. The suppression ship's field flickered and failed, overwhelmed by the sheer power of millions of Zentarians choosing to feel. In that moment, the Council's control shattered not with violence or revolution, but with a song of freedom that had waited generations to be sung. "I love you," ZXV said to Marcus, using their own voice for the first time, without translation or modulation. The words came out as both sound and light, a declaration that needed no interpretation. Marcus's answer was equally clear, equally human, and exactly what the revolution needed. "I know." 6 months after the revolution, the spires of the Zentarian High Council building still pierced the violet sky, but now they pulsed with unconstrained colors, a constant reminder of how much had changed. Inside, where sterile halls once enforced emotional conformity, a very different scene was unfolding. ZXV stood before a mirror, their thoracic plates shifting through patterns of nervous excitement as Sarah helped them adjust the traditional Earth wedding garment, a suit modified to accommodate their alien physiology. "The humans have a saying," Sarah teased, straightening their bioluminescent bow tie. "Something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue. You've got the blue covered naturally." Down the hall, Marcus fidgeted with his own outfit, a blend of Earth formal wear and Zentarian ceremonial patterns painted across his skin in bioluminescent ink. Vexlin, now serving as the head of the new Cultural Integration Council, watched with amusement. "You realize they said, adjusting Marcus's collar, that you'll be the first human-Zentarian marriage officially recognized on both worlds. The xenosociologists will be studying this for decades. Marcus smiled, touching the painted patterns that matched Zexvi's natural colors. Let them study. Everything worth doing in history probably looked crazy at first. The ceremony space had been designed to bridge both cultures. The traditional Earth wedding arch was constructed from living crystal that resonated with emotional energy, while the seated guests, human, Zentarian, and dozens of other species, created a tapestry of colors and forms that would have been impossible under the old regime. When Zexvi entered, their bioluminescence synchronized automatically with Marcus's heartbeat, a phenomenon that still fascinated the scientists in attendance. But science was the furthest thing from either of their minds as they met beneath the arch. The officiator, a former council member who had helped lead the reforms, spoke in both Earth languages and Zentarian light patterns. We gather today to celebrate not just the union of two beings, but the promise of what we can become when we choose understanding over fear, connection over control, and love over logic. Marcus had insisted on following the human tradition of personal vows. Before I met you, he began, his voice steady despite his racing heart, I studied alien cultures because I believed in the power of understanding across differences. But you taught me that true understanding isn't about observation. It's about connection. About being willing to feel everything, even when it's scary or overwhelming or wonderful beyond words. Zexvi's response came in both words and light, their natural bioluminescence creating patterns that made the Zentarians in the audience glow in sympathetic resonance. In trying to punish me, the old council gave me the greatest gift. They sent me to you. You showed me that emotion isn't weakness, that love isn't a flaw to be regulated, and that sometimes the most logical choice is to follow your heart, even when you're not entirely sure you have one. The exchange of rings included a uniquely Zentarian addition. As each ring was placed, it activated bioluminescent elements that pulsed in time with their partner's emotional state, a permanent reminder of their connection. By the authority of both Earth and Zentar, the officiator declared, and with joy that needs no regulation, I pronounce you legally, emotionally, and irrevocably bonded. Their first kiss as a married couple triggered something unprecedented. Every Zentarian in attendance began to glow with shared joy, their natural empathic abilities, long suppressed, creating a display that lit up the evening sky. Satellites later reported that the light show was visible from orbit. At the reception, humans danced to Zentarian rhythm lights, while Zentarians tried Earth delicacies with unregulated enthusiasm. Former council members mingled with refugee artists, and somewhere in the crowd, a young Zentarian scientist fell in love with a human musician, proving that some stories tend to repeat themselves. Was it worth it? Marcus asked softly as they swayed together, his painted patterns glowing in harmony with Zexvi's natural lights. All the risk, the rebellion, the change. Zexvi's answer came in a burst of color that needed no translation, but they spoke anyway. Every feeling, every moment, every beat of your beautifully unregulated heart. Above them, 3 suns set on a world where emotion was no longer a crime, and love knew no borders, biological, astronomical, or otherwise.